This is the story of the real Gatsby Mansion, a dream house meant to live forever, a place where the night seemed more golden than the day. Rivers of champagne flowed here. The orchestra played so loudly the sea fell silent. But beneath the glitter lay death, fear, and silence. The estate that inspired the Great Gatsby was not just a stage for parties, it was a trap. Fame was bought, names were erased, and deals were signed in quiet. The owner believed stone would shield his reputation. But what if the stone only hid the cracks? When the lights went out, the friends vanished. When the music faded, the bales remained. And one day, this palace simply disappeared from the map as if it had never existed. Why? Who paid the real price for this myth? With money, with family, with their future. This is not a fairy tale about wealth. It is a story of how a dream becomes a burden and how sparkle becomes a mask. So tell me, if the house that created the Gatsby legend could not survive, can the legend itself? If you enjoy deep investigations into Gilded Age architecture and the families who built it, please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments which house to explore next. Your support makes these detailed stories possible. Now, let's step onto that shore. Part 1. Gold Coast Morning. May 1899. The north shore of Long Island runs roughly 20 miles east from Flushing Bay. A coastline of farms, fishing villages, and quiet coves. No palaces yet, no gates, just salt wind and an occasional country house set back from the sound. But money is on the move. Families with names still unfamiliar to the society pages are buying land by the acre. They arrive by private rail car, study the waterline, sign papers, depart. This is not Newport, not yet. It is a blank map where new fortunes plan to write themselves in stone. At Roslyn, where the harbor narrows and the trees climb steep bluffs, one parcel stands apart, elevated, sheltered, a natural amphitheater facing north toward Connecticut and west toward the city's distant smoke. 216 acres. Deep water access. Forest dense enough to hide an estate. Open enough to frame views. The price is steep. His name, Clarence Hungerford Mackay, 25 years old. Heir to the Comstock, Silver Fortune and the Commercial Cable Company. An empire of undersea telegraph lines, binding continents. He is not building a summer cottage. He is announcing an arrival. Beside him stands Catherine Dewar, Mackay 22, daughter of a United States Army general and a living son by blood. His money is Western, recent, raw. Hers is colonial, quiet, assured. Together they embody the marriage that will define this shore. New capital joined to old pedigree. They call it progress. History will call it the Gilded Age. They commissioned Stanford White. Not merely his firm, the man himself. Stanford White of McKim-Mead and White. The Washington Square Arch, Madison Square Garden, the Century and Metropolitan Clubs, an architect whose name alone signals scale, permanence, and a beauty photographs never fully catch. He is 55. The program is exact. A great hall for 200 guests, a music room tuned for soloists, a dining room seating, forte without crowding, a library for serious collecting, guest wings prepared to house weekend parties of 20 or more, terraces overlooking the water, gardens stepping down to a private harbor, staff quarters concealed, yet efficient, every room sized to express not comfort but consequence. White listens, sketches, refines. He returns with elevations that make Catherine draw breath and Clarence nod once, sharply. The budget, $2 million, roughly $70 million in today's terms. The schedule, 3 years. Peak, workforce 200 men. Materials, Indiana limestone, Italian marble, domestic copper, Belgian glass, Oregon timber. Nothing ordinary, nothing sourced from just down the road. It is May of 1899. McKinley sits in the White House. The war with Spain has just ended. America holds new possessions. Cuba, the Philippines, Puerto Rico, Empire, abroad mansions at home. The symmetry is not accidental. The Mackays stand on raw ground, wind lifting her veil, his hand shading against the glare of the sound. In that moment they believe that stone can hold happiness. That scale equals safety. That a house, if made grand enough and well enough, will keep out time, judgment, doubt. White believes as well. He has built monuments before. This one will be different. Lighter in spirit, less marble palazzo, more American ease. He names it Harbor Hill. The name sounds gentle, pastoral, almost modest. It will be none of those things. Ground breaks in July. Part 2, Workshop Under Sky. The first crews arrive by barge and wagon. Surveyors with transits, engineers with stakes, foremen with lists already 2 pages long. They find forest, not field. Oaks, a century old. Maples thick as columns, undergrowth dense enough to lose a man. White as plan calls for clearing 40 acres without ruining the natural amphitheater that sold Mackay on the site. Selective cutting. The trees that remain must frame views, not block them. This is surgery, not logging. By August, the excavation begins. Foundation depth, 12 feet at the deepest point, stepping into bedrock, where the mansion's core will anchor. The hole spans 160 feet across the front facade and runs 90 feet along the main axis. Crews rotate in shifts. Steam shovels claw earth. Teams of horses drag spoil down temporary roads to raise the low ground near the shore. The noise carries across the harbor. Mackay's lawyers answer with plats, deeds, and silence. September brings stone. Indiana limestone comes by rail, 60 tons in the first shipment. $300 by year's end. Each block numbered to match White's drawings. Masons set up field shops, cutting sheds, mortar beds, a temporary forge for the ironwork. The workforce grows. At peak, 200 men, though the count changes with the season. Masonry sleeps in winter and wakes in spring. Some hold on for 3 years, others 3 weeks. Their names survive in payroll. Ledgers kept at the New York Historical Society. Domenico Russo, Master Maso, 42, from James Whitfield, lead carpenter, 51, trained in Edinburgh. Liam Brennan, 23, general labor, drowns in 1900 when a barge overturns with copper flashing aboard. No family found. Burial at public expense. The work goes on. The system is industrial. Materials arrive on timetables tighter than passenger trains. Lumber from Oregon. Old growth fir for framing. Clear vertical grain, no knots larger than a dime. Copper from Montana smelters. Rolled in Philadelphia, shipped in coils weighing 600 pounds apiece. Glass from Belgium, each pane crated in sawdust and insured for replacement cost plus freight. Nothing improvised. White's office issues revised drawings weekly. Contractors curse the precision and follow it. By 1901, the shell rises. Limestone walls climb beyond the second floor line. Scaffolding wraps the structure, a timber exoskeleton braced with hemp rope and iron dogs. Seen from the water, it resembles a cathedral in mid-construction. Visitors reach for romantic charts. European fantasies planted in American soil. White refuses the comparison. Not Gothic, he says, Renaissance restraint, scaled to the New World. Roofing begins in the spring of 1902. Copper tiles, each one stamped and soldered, overlap in courses that will bloom green within 5 years. Slate covers the secondary roofs. Lead flashing seals every joint. The ridge runs 140 feet. 4 chimneys climb another 20 feet above it. Each stack serves multiple hearths, 17 in all, depending on whether you count the servants' grates. Inside, plasterers lay 3 coats: scratch, brown, finish. Electricians thread wire through chases hidden within walls. Conduits invisible once the moldings go on. The lighting plan calls for 200 fixtures. A single plate in the Great Hall governs 12 separately. Craft and technology meet without a seam. By autumn of 1902, by 1901, the house is weather-tight. Not finished, mind you, but weather-tight. Painters, gilders, tile setters, and cabinet makers will be bustling around for another 6 months. But the crucial part is done. The roof holds. The windows seal. If you stand in the Great Hall, you hear only the wind, not the rain. It's a shell, waiting for a soul. Mackay visits weekly, overseeing the final touches. Catherine comes less often. She's pregnant with their first child. The house waits, patiently, for life to fill it. June 14, 1903. Harbor Hill receives its first guests. This isn't some grand, blowout opening. It's an intimate dinner. 32 names, chosen with immense care. There are architects, patrons, and editors from prestigious magazines like Harper's and Scribner's. The legendary Stanford White attends, seated near Catherine. Clarence rises for a toast. It's brief enough to signal confidence, yet long enough to acknowledge the debts owed to those who built this dream. The dining room absolutely glows. 6 massive candelabras, each with 18 arms, throw a warm, flickering light that bends and dances off the silver, the crystal, and the pale gold damask on the walls. The menus are in French, listing 7 decadent courses. The wines flow from Germany, France, and even California. The meal lasts a full 3 hours, and not a single person complains. This is just a rehearsal. The true performance begins in 1905. By then, the McKays have settled into a rhythm. Winters are spent in the city, summers in Europe or Newport, and the glorious spring and autumn months are reserved for Harbor Hill. Though, more and more Harbor Hill starts to compete with Newport for their time, the house demands their presence. Left empty, it seems to age, but when lived in, it truly declares itself. They host world-renowned musicians. In April of 1906, the great Enrico Caruso sings in the music room. It's a private recital for 60 guests who arrive by a special train from Pennsylvania Station. The acoustics, designed by Stanford White with advice from engineers at Carnegie Hall, are so perfect that Caruso's unamplified voice carries all the way to the back terrace. Guests stand outside, listening through open French doors, almost afraid to breathe, not wanting to miss a single note. Catherine weeps at the beauty of it. Clarence, moved, writes a check for $5,000 to the Metropolitan Opera's education fund. The check clears within 48 hours. They host philanthropists. In 1908, they hold a dinner to raise money for a tuberculosis sanatorium on Staten Island. 200 donors attend. The grand hall is cleared of all its furniture to make space for tables of 20, set in 2 long rows. The logistics are staggering. 40 waiters are borrowed from the Plaza Hotel and trained for 3 days just to learn Harbor Hill's floor plan and the complex sequence of 12 courses. The evening is a roaring success, bringing in $83,000. Editorials in the New York Times praise the McKays' generosity, conveniently forgetting to mention that the dinner itself cost a staggering $12,000 to stage. They host scholars, archaeologists, naturalists, and historians. This is Catherine's passion. She establishes a lecture series for crisp autumn evenings, complete with lantern slides and topics ranging from Egyptology to marine biology. Attendance is by invitation only, with audiences rarely exceeding 50 people. These nights feel different, quieter. The house seems to settle into its library and smaller salons, feeling more human-scaled. Clarence tolerates the series, but he doesn't attend. And, of course, they host society. This is the engine that drives it all. The balls of 1909, 1910, and 1912 are the stuff of legend. Guest lists swell to over 300 people. Full orchestras, not just string quartets, are set up in the music room, their doors thrown open to flood the hall with sound. Flowers are shipped in from Pennsylvania, greenhouses, roses, orchids, lilies, all arranged in towering columns 8 feet high. Champagne flows by the case. Suppers are served well past midnight, with dancing that continues until 3 in the morning. The entire ritual runs like a well-oiled machine. Invitations go out 6 weeks in advance. Catherine's secretary meticulously tracks RSVPs. Seating charts are revised daily as acceptances arrive. Menus go to Catherine for approval. The wine lists go to Clarence. The floral schemes require both of their signatures. The permanent staff of 30 swells to 60 for these nights. Extra footmen are hired from Manhattan agencies. Temporary cooks are brought in to reinforce the kitchen's core team of 5. The cost for a single ball is between $15,000 and $20,000, that's roughly $600,000 today. And that's not counting the wear and tear on the carpets, the linens, the crystal. And it's certainly not counting the strain on the hosts, because beneath all that glittering light, something is shifting. Photographs from these years show Catherine smiling. But over time, the smile tightens. Clarence grows heavier, his face puffing up in portraits. They appear together in public, but in private, the servants notice a growing quiet. Separate bedrooms, meals eaten at different hours. The house fills with guests, a whirlwind of noise and laughter, and then empties at dawn, leaving a cavernous silence. The couple coexists with the house, but not with each other. By 1914, the whispers begin. Not about the house, but about the marriage. Society columns print vague gossip items, hinting at trouble in paradise. That summer, Catherine travels to Europe alone. She stays for 4 months. Clarence remains at Harbour Hill, hosting smaller gatherings with fewer lights. The Grand Hall, a space built for joy, learns to echo. By 1915, the separation is no longer whispered. It is printed in black and white. Town Topics. The scandal sheet that terrifies New York society runs a blind item so transparent that everyone knows who it's about. A cable magnate's wife, who prefers Paris to the North Shore. The article cruelly wonders if the undersea wires carry messages home, or only silence. Catherine doesn't respond. She remains in Europe through the winter. Her letters to friends speak of museums, salons, and war relief work, but she never mentions Clarence. She never mentions Harbour Hill. The omission is louder than any complaint. Clarence, in turn, fills the house with a desperate energy. More dinners, more concerts, larger guest lists, longer weekends. He starts inviting business associates, not just society figures. Men from the cable company, from the postal telegraph merger. Men involved in the new wireless experiments that are beginning to threaten his empire. The tone of the house shifts. There's less music and more cigars. Less of Catherine's refined taste, more of Clarence's force of will. The house adapts. Staff notice which rooms stay dark, which sets of silver never leave their drawers. In May of 1916, Catherine returns. Not to reconcile, but to negotiate. The details are kept private, but the framework emerges later in court filings. Separate residences share public obligations. Unity on the surface, distance underneath. Catherine keeps her apartments at Harbour Hill. Clarence keeps his schedule. They appear together at the events that matter. Charity, galas, weddings, funerals. Photographs show them side by side, but never touching. Society accepts the performance. Divorce would be a scandal. This is an arrangement. Harbour Hill feels the change in its very bones. Servants describe how meals for two became meals for one, served in different rooms at different hours. The morning room, Catherine's domain, once crowded with books and letters, is closed up in her absence. Clarence's study, meanwhile, seems to expand. He works later, sleeps less, and drinks more. His physician becomes a weekly visitor. The butler is instructed to keep brandy stocked in 3 different locations. A house built to display harmony now displays its opposite, and the children witness it all. The McKays have 3 children: Ellen, John, and Catherine. They grow up in a palace, divided. Ellen would later write of rooms that belonged to one parent or the other, and the rooms between where we played, always careful not to choose sides. John leaves for boarding school at 12 and rarely comes home for breaks. The younger Catherine develops migraines that doctors can't explain, but that staff suspect are a form of escape. This isn't a metaphor, it's the recorded history. In 1915, the cost to maintain Harbour Hill, just maintenance, staff, utilities, and taxes, was $80,000 a year. That's roughly $2.4 million in today's money. The mansion must be fed, whether the marriage survives or not. Lawns require mowing, roofs require repair, staff require wages. A house of this scale does not pause for a personal crisis. Clarence pays, Catherine endures. The estate continues. But something essential has broken. The purpose has shifted. Harbour Hill was built as a declaration of love made visible, of fortune made permanent, of a family made into a dynasty. By 1916, it is merely a stage set. It's the thing that must be maintained, because selling it would be to admit failure. And for the McKays, failure is unthinkable. So, the lights stay on. The staff remains, and the magnificent, lonely house stands, a testament to a dream that has faded but is too costly to let die. Staff remained, gardens were tended, and guests arrived for weekends that looked, in photographs, exactly like the weekends of 1895. Same rooms, same rituals, same curated beauty. But if you walked through after midnight, after the guests retired and the servants withdrew, you'd find something different. Not ruin, not neglect, something harder to name. A palace that had learned loneliness. The rooms were too large for the people inside them, filled with a silence no orchestra could permanently cover. The house stood, the marriage did not. And outside, the world was changing in ways that would make both the palace and the pane feel like relics of a lost age. Inside, the work continued. At its peak, Harbour Hill needed 38 people to run. Winter trimmed at 222. Summer, when the family traveled, dropped it to 15. Skeleton crew preserving what absence could not erase. These weren't just numbers. They were names, wages, and schedules measured in decades. Charles Brennan, the head butler, arrived in 1904 and stayed for 23 years. His realm was the front of the house, the visible machinery of service. In 1915, his salary was $1,200 a year, plus room and board, roughly $36,000 today. He supervised 8 people directly, from the footman whose craft was motion without presence, to the 5 housemaids who began at 6 a.m. and finished near 8 p.m., earning $18 to $25 a month. The kitchen was another country. Chef Auguste Villar, recruited from Delmonico's, commanded a brigade of 5. His pay was $2,000, second only to the estate manager. Dinners for 30 demanded 4 hours of preparation. Balls for 300 required 3 days. His standards were French, his temper notorious. Outside, the grounds were a living ledger, tended by 12 men in summer. Head gardener Thomas Crawford kept 14 acres of lawn, seasonal flower beds, and orchards. Grass was cut with bush mowers, because the lady of the house, Mai, preferred the quiet. Every window had to frame effortlessness. The stables employed for more, including a groom, Patrick Hayes, who taught the Mackay children to ride. A world of bells and boards ran below stairs. The call system tied 112 pull cords throughout the house to a numbered panel in the servants' hall. A bell would ring, a number would flip, and a servant would move. To the family, it was silent. To the staff, it was the pulse of every hour. In 1915, the payroll alone was $42,000 a year. Add provisions, uniforms, and upkeep, and the figure climbed to $55,000, roughly $1.6 million today. That was the price of invisible service. The staff knew what the family sometimes forgot. The house didn't run on wealth. It ran on wages, hours, and hands that ached by nightfall. The architect's name, Stanford White, is carved into the limestone above the garden entrance. He didn't need to announce himself. The building did it for him. The approach was pure theater. A gravel drive climbs in a gentle curve, revealing the house in fragments. First a chimney, then a roofline, and at last the full facade, not sudden, but inevitable. Choreography in stone. The facade speaks a classical grammar with an American accent. The central block rises 3 stories, flanked by lower wings, creating a rhythm of tall, short, toe that balances mass with grace. The windows follow rules older than the Republic, their size and ornament changing with each floor, making the house's social order legible from the outside. But it's the terrace that reveals White's quiet brilliance. The house sits on manufactured high ground, and from the south facade, terraces fall in 3 broad stages, toward the harbor. The descent is processional. Stand at the bottom, and the house glows at sunset. Stand at the house and look down, and the water becomes the estate's horizon. White understood that great houses need great distance, not from neighbors, but from the ordinary world. Inside, the grand entrance hall declares importance without crushing intimacy. To the left, the music room and library Catherine's territory. To the right, the dining room and study Clarence's domain. At the center, a grand staircase rises under a skylight 3 floors above. This is the heart. White's genius was in proportion, not novelty. He didn't invent, he refined, using classical ratios like the golden section. The rooms feel right without you knowing why. You don't think about the architecture, you simply live in it. White borrowed the language of Tuscan villas and translated it. European villas grew from agricultural estates, where symmetry reflected farm logic. Harbour Hill grew from industrial wealth, where symmetry asserted control. Same vocabulary, different sentence. Rooms flow without confusion. Light arrives generously, and views align perfectly, connecting the house to the water beyond. This is architecture as argument, space as proof. White built Harbour Hill to say, wealth, yes, and taste. Power, yes, and restraint. The house succeeds at both. But someone had to pay for it. Clarence Mackay inherited an empire, measured in miles of copper wire, on the ocean floor. His father, John William Mackay, had coned the Comstock lode, the richest silver strike in American history, before founding the commercial cable company. The business was staggering in execution. Messages from New York to London traveled as electrical pulses through insulated copper resting 3 miles beneath the sea. Each cable costs $1 million to lay, but when they worked, they collapsed time. A message that once took 2 weeks by steamship now arrived in 2 minutes. By 1900, commercial cable carried about 23% of all transatlantic telegraph traffic, with annual revenues hitting $4.2 million, about $130 million today. Clarence took control in 1902 at age 28, just as Harbour Hill was rising. The timing was not accidental, but the technology was already being hunted. Wireless telegraphy was on the horizon. In 1901, Guglielmo Marconi proved a transatlantic wireless signal was possible. The transmission was crude, but it needed no seabed cables, no repair ships, no million-dollar strands of copper. Mackay saw the threat and answered with expansion. Between 1902 and 1910, commercial cable opened new Atlantic routes, established more offices, and poured millions into equipment upgrades. He diversified into domestic telegraph service and even experimental wireless research to hedge against Marconi's gains. Clarence negotiated personally, traveled constantly, and poured the profits from this relentless global enterprise into the quiet, curated beauty of Harbour Hill, a palace built on the invisible currents of a rapidly changing world. To avoid mass dismissals, he kept a core staff of 22, about half of what it was before the Great Depression. But the financial pressures were relentless. Property taxes, which were $12,000 a year in 1925, skyrocketed to $28,000 by 1935. The county argued that the mansion, stables, and greenhouses were permanent improvements, fixed assets they could tax heavily, even as land values collapsed everywhere else. Clarence challenged the assessment 3 times, winning only a partial reduction once. The county needed the money, and grand estates like Harbour Hill were an easy target. By 1936, Clarence was 62, and his health was failing. He had poorly controlled diabetes and cardiac strain, made worse by the constant stress of his business. Postal telegraph. Merger talks with Western Union were on again, off again, and the company was bleeding money. He couldn't stop it, only slow the decline. His fractured marriage to Catherine had solidified into a legal separation. They were rarely seen together, and when they were, they both looked far older than their years. The magnificent house itself began to show signs of wear. It wasn't neglect, but deferred maintenance. A fresh coat of paint was postponed. Carpets were turned instead of replaced. In 1937, the roof started leaking. Repairs were slow, done room by room, as cash allowed. The grand ballroom ceiling developed stains, a detail visitors politely pretended not to notice. Between 1936 and 1940, 4 serious buyers came forward. Developers wanted the land, institutions wanted the building, but all the offers were a fraction of the original construction cost. One bid in 1938 was for just $350,000 for the entire estate. Considering Clarence had spent $2 million on the house alone, he refused. But refusal wasn't a strategy, it was pride. By 1940, the question wasn't if Harbour Hill would be sold, but how intact or in pieces. Before that could be answered, war arrived. December 1941. Pearl Harbor, America mobilized for war. At Anampulutuju, Clarence Mackay was too old and too ill for service. He did what he could, offering his telegraph company's capacity for military messages and making public gestures of support. But it didn't reverse his financial decline. Years earlier, his wife Catherine had secured a legal separation, not a divorce, but a formal division of property. She kept their Manhattan townhouse, and he kept Harbour Hill and his failing telegraph business. He now lived in the vast mansion alone. The staff had dwindled to just 14. Whole wings of the house were closed off. The ballroom, silent since 1939, was shuttered to save on heat. He lived in his study, his bedroom, and the small dining room, where meals were served for one. The great hall echoed with emptiness. There's a bit of confusion about his personal life around this time. He had actually remarried back in 1931 to an opera singer named Anna Case, who was 26 years his junior. The marriage was often strained, and they lived mostly separate lives, with Anna in Manhattan and Clarence isolated on Long Island. It's important to get the dates right because rumors often get tangled. Clarence Mackay died on November 12, 1938, at the age of 64. His death happened before America entered the war, and his second marriage occurred long before that. After his death, what followed was a complex legal battle, not high society drama. His second wife Anna contested the will. His first wife, Catherine, already had her settlement. His children received shares but not control of the estate. Famously, his daughter Ellen, who married composer Irving Berlin against his wishes, had been disinherited and only partially restored to the will. The legal wrangling dragged on for years. During this time, Harbor Hill deteriorated rapidly. Only a caretaker and 2 groundsmen remained. The house was winterized, but the heat was turned off. In 1940, pipes froze and burst, flooding the north wing. Vandals broke windows. Local teens explored the empty, echoing halls. By 1942, the family finally decided to sell, but it was the worst possible time. During the war, buyers were scarce, and developers couldn't get building materials. The estate was listed at $400,000. No offers. The price dropped to $300,000. Still nothing. By 1945, the asking price was $250,000 for a property that once cost over $3 million to build and furnish. Finally, in 1947, a buyer emerged. A developer saw potential not in the house, but in the land. The plan was to create a new suburban development, Harbor Hill Estates, with 60 residential lots. The magnificent mansion wasn't an asset, it was an obstacle. Demolition was part of the deal. The family accepted a final offer of $190,000. In October 1947, the demolition began. It was a methodical, 6-month-long erasure. First, salvage crews stripped the house of its treasures. Marble mantels, crystal chandeliers and mahogany paneling were sold off to other homes, seeking instant grandeur. Then came the dynamite and wrecking balls. The limestone was crushed for fill. The copper roof was stripped for scrap. By April 1948, the site was bare. 45 years after it was completed, Harbor Hill was gone, not slowly, not by neglect, but deliberately and efficiently erased. What's left? Photographs, floor plans, in archives, and a few scattered fragments in museums. But the house itself is gone. Today, 60 houses stand where one mansion once stood, their owners likely unaware that their backyards once hosted orchestras. And then there's the myth, the legend of Gatsby's Mansion, forever hosting a party where the guests never age. The irony is staggering. Fiction preserved what real-life fortune could not. Harbor Hill's demolition was not unique. Between 1940 and 1960, over 200 of Long Island's Gold Coast estates were destroyed for the same reasons: crushing taxes, high maintenance, and the relentless pressure of suburban development. The pattern was always the same: families sold, developers bought, and bulldozers arrived. But from these losses, something important began to shift. The widespread destruction sparked a new movement. In 1966, Congress passed the National Historic Preservation Act, creating a legal framework to protect significant buildings. States followed suit, creating landmark designations, and local historical societies organized to fight for their heritage. And some estates were saved. Ohika Castle, just a few miles from where Harbor Hill stood, was saved and is now a hotel. Old Westbury Gardens was preserved by the family and opened to the public. The former Guggenheim estate is now the Sands Point Preserve. These victories all share common elements: community advocacy, creative financing, and finding new uses for old buildings, turning them into museums, schools, or event venues. The loss of Harbor Hill taught preservationists a vital lesson: silence costs everything. Today, organizations across the country fight to protect these architectural treasures. But success is never guaranteed. The fight happens now, publicly and loudly, and you are a part of this fight. Every time you visit a historic house, you help justify its budget. Every time you share a story like this one, you build the cultural case for saving what remains. When a local landmark is threatened, your voice matters. Harbor Hill can't be rebuilt, but dozens of similar estates still stand, vulnerable, waiting for us to decide that their value is greater than the convenience of tearing them down. The workers, the family, the architect, the guests, they are all gone. What endures is the story, the photographs, and the choice we make today about the treasure still standing. Gatsby is fiction. The losses are real. The next rescue is up to us. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, please consider subscribing for more explorations into our forgotten history.